There are going to be lots of different argument forms. Some of them are listed here, as well as in the readings or in some of your textbooks. The other thing that we want to look out for are errors in reasoning. So in some of these classes, we'll cover these in more detail, but there is a list here in case you're interested in finding out more of those. All right, so the last thing I have here is just a quick sort of diagram to help remind you the steps of identifying arguments, right? So first you want to figure out if you're dealing with an argument, right? First is an explanation. So try to find the conclusion, then the premises. Okay, so once you figured out if you have an argument, then you want to figure out what kind of an argument it is, right? Is it deductive, or is it only trying to establish the likelihood or probability of something? Okay, so note that inductive arguments are actually far more common in the real world, right? Most of our knowledge comes from inductive reasoning. In science, right, you are maybe perhaps going to get a treatment and it has an 80% likelihood of success, right? So that seems pretty high, right? But in other cases, we might think that maybe just a 50% likelihood is enough, right? So maybe if you're just, curious about whether a movie's playing at a local theater later, like, oh, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. So induction is the stuff that we encounter all the time, but as we know, inductive arguments can never guarantee the truth of their conclusion. So most of what we know then really still has a likelihood of being false, right? So deductive arguments are much stronger, but they're a little bit more rare. So once we have the kind of argument that we're looking at, we want to figure out if it's successful. Again, if we have a deductive argument, we want to know if it's valid or invalid. Okay, so a valid argument, right? If the premises are true, conclusion has to be true. Invalid argument, even if the premises are true, the conclusion could still be false. Now notice here that invalid is marked red, because if it turns out you have a deductively invalid argument, we don't really care about anything else because the conclusion isn't going to follow from it anyways. Similarly with induction, if we're assessing for strength or weakness, if we have a weak argument, meaning that the premises do not make the conclusion very likely, then we're not concerned any further. But if we have a deductively valid argument or an inductively strong argument, right? Strength meaning that, again, if the premises are true, they make the conclusion more likely. Then we want to go out and check and see if the premises are true in the world, right? Don't bother with this last step if the conclusion doesn't follow. But if it does, then we want to figure out if they're true. If we have a deductively valid argument with true premises, again, that's sound. If it turns out that the deductively valid argument's premises are not true, even just one of them, then the argument is unsound. Similarly with induction, right? If you have a strong inductive argument, if it has true premises, it is cogent, and if at least one of its premises is false, it is uncogent.